What is an exponential equation? An exponential equation is an equation that contains an exponent. For example, let's create a table of values for input x and output y. So if I have an input of a -3, my output y would be 2 raised to the -3 power, which is equivalent to 1 over 2 to the third power, which is 1 over 8. An input of a -2 would result in 1 over 4. An input of a -1 would result in 1 over 2. An input of 0 would be an output of 1. An input of 1 would be an output of 2. An input of 2 would be an output of 4. An input of 3 would be an output of 8. Let's go ahead and graph this. So at 1 we have 2, at 2 we have 4, at 3 we have 8, at a -1 we have 1/2, at a -2 we have 1/4, and a -3 we have 1/8. So our equation will look something like this. We can tell that that is not linear. It is the graph of an exponential equation, y equals 2 to the x. Let's compare linear equations with exponential equations. Linear equations, we have a constant slope, which is equal to our change in y over our change in x. So let's determine our change in y here. Our change in y would equal an increase of 2. Between 7 and 9, we have another increase of 2. Between 9 and 11, we have a change of 2. Our change in y, from 3 to 4, we have a +1, so our change in x is equal to a +1. Between 4 and 5 is a +1, and between 5 and 6 is a +1. So our slope for this example is going to be 2 over 1, a slope of 2. Let's go ahead and graph that. We can see that our change in y over our change in x is constant. Therefore, we have a linear equation. Because our rise over run stays constant, in other words, our rise of a +2 and our run being a +1, our slope stays constant at 2 over 1. Therefore, we have a graph of a linear equation. Let's take a look at another table of values. Well, over here our change in x is going to be equal to a +1. The change between a -2 and a -1 is also a +1. -1 and 0 is a +1. So we're looking good so far. We have a constant change in x, but let's see if we have a constant change in y. Well, from 1/2 to 1 is a change of y is equal to a +1/2. But the change from 1 to 2 is equal to a change of 1. Oh, and from 2 to 4 would be a change of 2. So no, I do not have a constant change in y. So let's cross that out. Instead, I'm going to look to see if I have a constant ratio. A constant ratio is when the term divided by the term before it is constant. For instance, let's take 8 divided by 4. That's equivalent to 2. How about 4 divided by 2? Well, that is also 2. How about 1/2 divided by 1/4? Well, that is also equal to 2. And of course, let's do the last one of 1/4 divided by 1/8, which is also equal to 2. So we have a constant ratio here, and our constant ratio is equivalent to 2. Let's go ahead and graph this. So at 0 we have 1. At 1 we have an output of 2. At 2 we have an output of 4. And at 3 we have an output of 8. At a -1 we have an output of 1/2. At a -2 we have an output of 1/4. And at a -3 we have an output of 1/8. Let's go ahead and connect these coordinates. We can determine from the graph that this graph is not linear, but because it has a constant ratio, we can determine that the graph is exponential. To sum up, the essential difference between linear equations and exponential equations would be that linear equations have a constant slope, whereas exponential equations have a constant ratio.